Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next and indeed the final presentation in our Working Tools seminar series. My name is Andrew Martindale, and I'm here on behalf of Alison Wiley and Eric Simons as organizers of our community-facing data management platforms for Indigenous University Partnerships series. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that UBC Vancouver is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. The land it is situated on has always been a place of learning for the Musqueam, who for millennia have passed on their culture, history, and traditions from one generation to the next on this site. And this is our final presentation in the series, a space that has drawn presenters and participants from around the country and even across the world. And I'd like to acknowledge that many of us work and reside in settler colonial contexts on the unceded ancestral and traditional territory of many Indigenous communities, to whom we owe deep thanks. As presenters in this series have noted, performative gratitude is an important but insufficient response to colonialism and racism, and our energies need to be dedicated towards real change. Hopefully this series has taken small steps in that direction. As it's the last one of the series, I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the help and support of the many people without whom we would not have been able to put this series together. First, I'm deeply grateful to all the presenters who joined us back when this was going to be a workshop and who cheerfully adapted to the digital platform. While not what we originally envisioned, the online series has allowed us to reach more people and explore topics more fully than we otherwise would. Sort of a silver lining, I think. I'd also like to thank all of you who've attended these sessions for taking the time out of your week to join us on Friday afternoons with your engagement, your interests, and your questions. I'm grateful to your broad and supportive enthusiasm, and I will miss our time together. My co-organizers, Alison Wiley and Eric Simons, have worked tirelessly in the background and often in the foreground for more than a year, going back to when this was envisioned as an in-person get-together. Their work has been indispensable, thanks to them. Neha Gupta has also been very generous with her time, stepping in to assist us as we've needed over the last few months. Thanks, Neha. We have been supported by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada via a Connections grant, and by our patient and welcoming co-sponsors at UBC's Green College, led by Mark Vasey. Lastly, let me extend thanks to our colleagues at Musqueam, whose archaeological seminar series this past summer charted the course that we've been following and have allowed us to continue their excellent work. I also want to mention that we have been developing plans for a subsequent series. This can be hosted ideally by Musqueam and Green College. It's still in the development stages, but we'll focus on the archaeology and heritage implications of BC's Bill 41 from 2019, the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We had hoped to start this early in the new year, but we're going to be putting it off a little bit, at least until later in 2021, and I'll keep you posted on those developments. In the meantime, there are several presentations that will be of interest to you, I think, including one by our colleagues at Musqueam and PCIGR, the Pacific Center for Isotopic and Geochemical Research from UBC. That's going to be held on Friday, January the 15th at 3 p.m. I'll send out an email with information on this. There's also a few science and technology studies talks that Alison is organizing in the new year, which will likely be of interest to you. So our time together is perhaps not yet quite over. A few housekeeping notes. Please keep your microphones turned off. If you've got a question or a comment during the presentation, please add it to the chat or let us know that you'd like to ask something. The presenting team would be happy to take your questions as they go, so we won't be compiling them necessarily for the end of the presentation. Now let's turn to our presenters. It is with great pleasure that I welcome our next presenting team of Dave Sheppy, Kate Hennessy, Michael Blake, Clarence Penner, Sonia Williams, and I also noticed that Natasha Lyons is here too, to present Curating Continuity in Sq'éwlets, a Stolo Coast Salish community in the Fraser River Valley. This is an examination of the development of digital Sq'éwlets, a virtual museum. You will perhaps remember Dave from an earlier presentation on Stolo Connect. And if you recall, today's presentation was originally scheduled for October, but I think that we're going to find that it is a fitting way to end our seminar series. I'm going to turn it over to Dave now, who will introduce himself and his co-authors. Dave.
Thank you, Andrew. And on behalf of the co-presenters today, I just want to thank you and Alison and Eric for putting this series on and for hosting us, also for accommodating the shift in scheduling to fit our schedules and availability. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I'm personally coming from my location here in the Chilliwack Valley on the ancestral unceded lands of the Sq'éwlets tribe of Stolo Coast Salish peoples. I know various other members of our presenters are located in different parts of either South Timuc or beyond. I'll move along here in terms of presenting in welcoming co-presenters today, starting with Clarence Penyer, Grand Chief Clarence Penyer, who's joining us as a member of the Sq'éwlets First Nation and Sq'éwlets tribe, and a part of the production that we're here to talk about today. Long-standing Siam in the Stalo community, and had the great pleasure to work with him for a good couple of decades at this point in time. Instrumental in what we were doing in our community-founded work, and instrumental in the roots to that work, connected to Dr. Mike Blake from UBC, now Professor Emeritus in the Anthropology Department, focusing in archaeology, and a member of the team, and again, long-standing member of relational point of connection between Sq'éwlets and other Stalo communities and UBC archaeology. Got Natasha Lyons joining us, and even though she wasn't on the bill, she wasn't originally available, I would think, but now for today is, and that's one of the benefits of our rescheduled event. Natasha runs Ursus Heritage Consulting, and is again key member of our project team responsible for the Sq'éwlets Virtual Museum project, along with Kate Hennessy, associate professor, I believe, is that correct, at the School of Interactive Arts and Technology at Simon Fraser University. So all of us and many others came together to develop the project we want to present to you today. We're here to present to you today. And we're gonna be forewarned, it'll be a little organic, you know, as much as we try to organize things. I think it goes along with how we work together in developing this project, and also how we're likely and are gonna work together today to present this project to you. By all means, ask questions, and we'll entertain those as we go. I'll just pause for a moment and offer the opportunity for any of our co-presenters to further elaborate on any part of the introductions. Also to note that Chief Sonny Williams is not able to join us today, at least at this point, as the current Chief of Sq'éwlets First Nation, and also a key member and participant in our work, along with his wife, Crystal, and his family, his children. So Kate, Mike, Natasha, or Kat, anything else you'd like to add as reference to yourselves and introduction?
Well, I'll just maybe jump in first and say thank you, Dave, for that round robin introduction of the team, and I also want to acknowledge with incredible gratitude the enormous amount of work that the entire Sq'éwlets and Stalo Nation communities have put into supporting and encouraging all of the work that we've done over not just a few years, but decades now. And it's everything that we're talking about today. Everybody should be absolutely aware that it is all the result of incredible community support, and that support is something that motivates us all to be here today and to share what we know based on what we've learned from the knowledge keepers and knowledge holders in the Sq'éwlets community, but the greater Stalo territory, and all up and down the Fraser River region. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to be on here and talking to all of you, and about Sq'éwlets. And Mike and I met when we were young. Yeah, no, I mean, it's been an interesting and good relationship that we've had over the years. So, you know, we learn from each other. So thank you.
Great. Kate or Natasha?
I can just say hello, and it's really an honor to be here, and so great to be back with all of my collaborators and friends here. So thank you for welcoming us today.
Same for me. Over to you, Dave.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Also very nice to see some familiar faces in the audience here today. They're getting used to this kind of virtual environment. To make the most of our time, we'll jump right into it. We've got a bit of a PowerPoint, and we'll work through that, ultimately getting to navigation through the site itself. And thanks, Andrew, for sending that link out in the chat box there to the site. You're welcome to look at that as we go along, for sure. But I'll share the screen. I think I've got to share a screen, share, and then, yeah, let's go to, let me unshare. Oh no, thought I had this down. Bear with me for a second, folks. Stop share. Okay. Try that one more time. There we go. So can everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think we are good to go then.
Dave, launch your PowerPoint though.
I have not launched it. Sorry, guys.
It's okay.
Oh, can you not see the PowerPoint? Oh, I see. So never mind. There we go. That. Got it, right? Good to go?
Yeah.
Okay. Apologies for that. So we're here to talk to you today about a virtual project, a virtual Museum of Canada based project. And as Mike was saying, is heavily involved and based on the support from Sq'éwlets First Nation and community. We'll give you a bit of a background as to where this emerged from in terms of connections. So background on the development of the project, and then we'll get into the project focusing on a few areas of relationship to this digital work, addressing and founded on concepts and content or of belongings, the ontology, the worldview, and relationship of Sq'éwlets First Nation and as a tribe to the broader Stalo tribes and Coast Salish peoples, and how those key elements of the worldview are brought into the framework and structure of the Sq'éwlets website, or the digital Sq'éwlets. Teachings, what are those and how are they brought into and why are they brought into and embedded in the work we created as foundational pieces and objectives, and then the site demonstration. And I think a key part that we want to convey, a key piece to what this is about in the interface between the digital world and culture and community, is that we're working to perpetuate and not replace culture through digital transfer of knowledge rooted in material objects and belongings. And we find that this combination can be a powerful tool, a powerful set of relationships when orchestrated properly and in the hands and control of the communities, and particularly Sq'éwlets in this case, as to what the objectives are, what they want to achieve, and get out of a digital world that we are creating. Okay, so who are the Stalo? And let's start there. And where is Sq'éwlets? So Stalo as the people of the river, Halkomelem speaking peoples, and in this case, located in the Lower Fraser River watershed of southwestern BC. And the image you see with the concentric circles, in the center of those circles, landing right here, is where Sq'éwlets is located. Sq'éwlets tribal area and contemporary reserve locations are situated at the junction of the Harrison River and the Fraser River, and are located in this area here. And the word Sq'éwlets contains the term, or the sound scow, which refers to a bend in the river, and is clearly associated with Harrison Bay, where the Harrison hits Harrison Bay and then bends around to then empty into the Fraser River. At that junction is one of the ancient village sites that's ancestral to Sq'éwlets, that was the focus of archaeological work going back to the early 90s, in which, as Mike and Kat both referenced, where they got to know each other some time ago, and were really central to how this story progresses. There we go. So where did this story begin, and what is the developmental foundation to the work we're going to review? The fundamental connections here, the foundational connections, are just that. They go back to the Sq'éwlets community-based archaeology that began around 1991 and has really continued ever since in various ways onward until today. While there was an intensive period of field work that was rooted in UBC and also included SFU, those years, a solid decade of continuous archaeological work on the old Keithiel site in particular, resulted in a tremendous amount of material and information, knowledge, and insight into that history, the pre-contact history of Sq'éwlets and the relationships in that community. Some time went by and realized at some point that there was more work to be done through initially unrelated work, and I talked about this previously in the previous presentation, to some connection. John Welsh, I have to give credit to John Welsh in approaching myself and Stalination to talk about connecting through his Sovereignty and Heritage project. We entertained that, became connected, and translated that into a holism and heritage focus for the work here at Stallo. And that resulted in a number of outcomes. But ultimately, it relates to is a foundation to what we did here as a team to look at bringing together, in this case, and consolidate the artifact catalog for Keithiel, to unite the collections that were gathered and were housed in different locations, to bring them together and to house them in one location at the Lab of Archaeology at UBC, and to connect the community at Sq'éwlets in particular through the Reciprocal Research Network, which Sue Rowley presented on earlier in this session, in this series as well. So having kind of worked through those steps and bringing together the team, Natasha, Mike, links to Sq'éwlets, and Kat and Andy Phillips and others, the opportunity arose then to put in a proposal and follow and pursue an opportunity to create a virtual Museum of Canada project. So I think it was Natasha and Kate that recognized that, brought that forward, and we decided with the input from Sq'éwlets, let's do this. So it became a foundation to really incorporate those other elements of holism that we were aiming to and working on achieving, and to set those objectives within this centerpiece as a project. And we developed that proposal with Sq'éwlets and put that in. Fortunately, we're successful in getting the funding to proceed. And so in proceeding, how did we begin? And the image here that's part of the site itself shows one of our initial meetings with Sq'éwlets members and advisory body, where we asked a bunch of questions that were essential to giving us direction about, again, what does the community want to do with this site, with this digital world? And so tell your story. There were a number of things that we recorded that were very clear, and these are the notes that were taken on our smartboard there, and we can present and capture exactly what was said and recorded in this manner. But very, very strong direction to focus on the youth, set the table to tell the story. Look to the live libraries of elders and connect elders and youth. Look at explaining how we got here. Again, some of these elements, Sq'éwlets, Sq'éwlets, place names and language, Halkomelem, are keys to the ontology piece, the structure of the site itself. And as I'm going through this, folks, I would certainly invite the other members of the team to pipe in. Please don't be shy about, because I can't really see anybody. I'm just adding as we go along. So this scanning through the notes that were taken from this one initial session, really clear, very good direction coming from the elders, coming from the advisory body, to incorporate language, use Halkomelem.
And Dave, this is Natasha, I'll just pop in and say that people were really specific about what they wanted to see. They were specific about colors. They were specific about, metaphors. They were specific about stories. So it wasn't like we were sort of taking general guidance. It was like we were being told what to do in a good way.
Absolutely. And very much in the way of what I've experienced with elders is could be very, very clear and direct as to what our direction is. And I think the very, very fortunate circumstance to be able to work with the community in the way we have been doing, with a really well-built relationship and high level of comfort and trust that had been established and continues to be maintained, opened the door to that kind of clarity and input from elders, including Kat, without hesitation or reservation. But the foundation of a pre-existing and well-established relationship here is really part of this whole story. It's a significant part of this whole story. But what to tell the youth around self-sufficiency? This is where lessons come in, aspects of the lessons that are contrary to some of what's out there in the contemporary world in terms of the public's perspective and pigeonholing, stereotyping, and commentary on Indigenous peoples as not exactly right, or not even close to right. In fact, disrespectful in many ways. And so this was an opportunity to address the youth and give them a foundation to understand who they are, to take pride in yourself, to rely on handouts, stand on your own 2 feet, to have self-respect and honor. These are principles rooted in tradition in a healthy community going back many, many, many generations and centuries and millennia. Always remember who you are. These are great points of instruction that are rooted in teachings and principles. So to perpetuate that in a goal to tell our youth and the world outside who we are and the world needs to know is that kind of precise direction in how to articulate with the digital medium to allow us to do this in an effective way. So we ran through this exercise again. Goals, what are the goals? Again, educate the youth, explain where we come from. Kat always talks about to know where you're going, you have to know where you come from. And how do we know where we've come from in this case? Well, the archaeology that has been taking place for quite some time provides us a substantial insight into where Sq'éwlets as a tribe, as communities come from. And so again, another ideal link, utilizing that information in a good way possible to connect it with the community above and beyond the RRN to tell that story. And you'll see terms in here like at the bottom of the lower slide, Sq'éwlets. Again, perspective on history that is a reflection or a representation of the ontology, the worldview, and the different approaches to that past, the Sq'éwlets, the distant past, the Sq'éwlets, the more recent contemporary past, and so on, brought into perspective and use. Family. Family is critically important. What is family? What's a healthy family? What are the relationships between the families today and those of the ancestral past? Concerns in presenting all of this were also articulated. So there are aspects of Sq'éwlet culture that can't be shared publicly. There are things that will never be shared publicly outside of very specific groups in the community. There are concerns and protocols around sharing information and stories, knowledge that's owned. There are intellectual properties that underlie the maintenance and perpetuation and sharing of information. And there are guidelines to information that's shared as to how that can and should be used. So instruct the people in the public to be respectful and how to be respectful in receiving the information that's being shared. And for example, we hear this many times, culture is not for sale. So don't sell this, it's not for personal use or gain. It's intended to be used as a factor of teaching people about who Sq'éwlets are and to work towards building a respectful relationship, not only among the youth themselves and in the community, but with the broader non-Sq'éwlet and Sq'éwlets community to improve that relationship. And as Natasha mentioned, elements of design were also points that we asked about. Thinking of when you're, in terms of being Sq'éwlets, what's the imagery? What are the icons of your Sq'éwlets identity in that location, at the bend in the river, the Sq'éw, where the two rivers meet, the Harrison and the Fraser, and the blending of the water and the dark, clear waters of the Harrison and the muddy, brown waters of the Fraser come together, and they're articulated here. They blend and swirl around in this incredible way that was brought to us as this is what people think of: the cedar trees, the water, the mountains, and in particular where the river comes together and swirls to mix those colors were, in a sense, icons of design and representation of Sq'éwlets that we were able to incorporate into the site itself. And this is, again, there was a very large group of people involved, which we'll aim to thank at the end as we get to our acknowledgements. But this shows Nancy Penier and others, Betty Charlie, a few folks with Kate, looking at imagery, thousands of images, I would have to say, taken by folks that Kate was working with. I knew her, Kadir. This is from 2015. And others contributed really beautiful photography and video footage for our consideration, and that of the community particularly, in selecting what would then go up onto the site and populate the site. How the site was structured, the architecture, the relationships of the pieces of the site were all, again, worked through by the team, brought forward to the community, and community gave their input and direction. Ultimately, the final decisions on how we put this together were in the hands of the community who were in the driver's seat in this project. I'll stop there. Anybody else? That's the developmental background before we get into some of the structure, the ontology and structure of the site. I'll pause, take a breath. Any questions, any comments from the team?
Well, one of the important things was just to have the involvement of people from our community to make sure that, you know, the story was going to be properly done. So, you know, that's just for the ones that are listening in. You have to work with people in the communities.
I think it's really interesting to revisit those notes, Dave, and to see them again. It's been a while, but in thinking about the site and the way the site emerged, it's exciting to see the threads that really remain from that first meeting way back in February, long ago, 2014 or 13 or something like that, and how the site emerged.
We have a question from Chelsea in the chat. I don't know if you guys can read that. But...
Can somebody read that out for us?
Sure. The question from Chelsea is, how were the photos solicited? Were there specific themes or ideas?
Kate, you want to talk about that one?
Yeah. And Natasha too might want to talk about that. You know, we held a series of workshops at different times where we were starting to generate content based on those initial notes that Dave shared. So the photos that we're seeing there were taken at different times through various youth workshops and community workshops. There were a lot of photos of salmon processing and cutting. There were photos from a kind of youth portrait project that had been suggested. There were a lot of photos of our process of going out to the Kithiel site as a group over time, you know, leading up to the development of the site. And there were video interviews that we had filmed that were organized within the context of community-based workshops to develop and document the stories that people wanted to share in the site. Am I missing anything, Natasha?
Okay, well, Kate, then there was also, as you sort of suggested, there was a youth and elders camp, and as one part of that, we asked some of the youth to bring in objects that meant something to them. So there's objects on the site or photos of youth with objects that they were telling their stories about in video. So they sort of had a portrait with these objects that were family heirlooms of some kind. But we were also consolidating photos from, you know, the past 20 years before that. So of the field schools and of the youth in the Sq'éwlets community, you know, who were a part of that. And Kat said that he and Mike started out young. Well, you know, Kate and I were undergrads when I was first at Sq'éwlets, so I actually grew up with the present chief, you know, essentially. So there was a lot of photos to consolidate. And then here we have, you know, Betty and Sissy and Nancy and Katina looking at photos, and folks in the community took away a lot of photos that they wanted, but also then they had to, you know, choose what they wanted for the site. And a big part of that was a representation of who they are today as a community.
Yeah, just like, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Just what I recall too from this particular workshop, and I can talk about a little bit later if you like, was thinking about traditional knowledge labels, something that we use in the site. And this was also, you know, really looking closely at photos that I think are in large part here documenting the process of bringing people together and carrying out these workshops and elders and youth camps. And this is kind of like documentary, a recording of our process, and then presenting it back to people here in this picture, and thinking about whether or not things have been documented that might not be suitable for sharing publicly, that might be for families only, or to, you know, to sort of be approved and really reflected on as the particular images that would be chosen to be shared in this public way in the Virtual Museum exhibit.
There's an interesting thing in the background on the wall to the left, way over beyond Sissy's head, I believe, to the left, is a plaque with an aged piece of paper and a photograph, an old photograph, that sets out the chain of leadership in Sq'éwlets going back quite a few generations. And that was also incorporated. So there are pieces of parts of what are in the band office, what's been placed there because it's important to the community, and also what's in people's homes. And I believe the photograph, when we go back to see Kat literally today, in his image on the wall behind him is a picture of his ancestors that were also brought into this site. So, you know, it's looking to what's meaningful in the homes and community of Sq'éwlets, what resonates, what's important, and what serves to perpetuate the teachings and relationships that we are instructed to, you know, work this site to provide. And also I wanted to say, not to underplay in any way, Natasha, your relationship to Sq'éwlets is like, you're like family there, and you know, in terms of the underlying foundation of relations that supports this work, you know, the relationships go back to, as you say, your place in the field schools, and you've been there forever ever since. So there's a lot of people with a lot of invested connections here that are the web supporting this project. So you might remember in some of those notes, you saw the term Sq'éwlets and Sq'éwlets that goes and speaks to the way in which the site represents Sq'éwlets and Stalo Coast Salish perspectives on the world. And it won't get into really describing the other image that's you'll see on the screen with the spheres, but that is a model of worldview and ultimately a model of health that I've used a number of times, representing ontology. And it's again with the foundation of looking to support well-being in the community. Then that model translates into practice through the instruction of the elders and advisors, and becomes clear, manifesting in the structure and content of the site. Even the homepage, Sq'éwlets, again, the river background, that's that image, and it moves. When you go to the site and see it live, it moves, and you'll see that swirling effect, the clear and brownish waters coming together where the two rivers meet. The sturgeon is an aspect of Sq'éwlets. Sturgeon are the ancestral ancestor. Well, they're the ancestor of Sq'éwlets tribe specifically, where that connection to and they come from sturgeon as a foundational origin. So you'll see them represented also on the homepage. And then the little design elements below the text are the sturgeon scales that run throughout the site and are used as tools to navigate through the site. So Sq'éwlets is represented, the place is represented, and the tools of the site are brought into the user that are your articulation, your interaction with Sq'éwlets directly in the way you run through the site. And these brands, in a sense, they're the traditional use, or sorry, not traditional use, but they are the, flipping my mind, the traditional knowledge.
Yeah, traditional knowledge labels. Yeah.
There we go. These are a few of the traditional knowledge labels that we'll get into in more detail later on, but you can see them on the homepage. And the language, of course, Halkomelem, using the correct orthograph, the correct spelling in the Halkomelem orthography, upriver Halkomelem orthography of Sq'éwlets. Stamis, that's the word for about. Sq'éwlets, the distant past. Sq'éwlets, the more recent past. And again, belongings as a foundational link here, rooted in the long-standing connections of Sq'éwlets community-based archaeology. The youth and the canoe club that Sunny and Crystal are run with a number of their kids and others. That's Stamis image. The Sq'éwlets also shows landscapes and places of transformation that are the foundation for the origins of the world in which Sq'éwlets is located. And Sq'éwlets, the practices, the genealogies, the relationships to the environment, fishing, salmon filleting, and so on. The use of knives, you can see directly, that's Sonny Williams filleting sockeye, and the knives he's using today relative to the knives that were used in the past that were recovered through the archaeological work, all linked in here. Again, Sq'éwlets, the language is also not just printed, but it's spoken. The little dial or arrow on the bottom of the screen is a recorded sound clip of the word spoken by elders, knowledge speakers, or language speakers who can say those words in the right way. Sq'éwlets are also represented in place names in what's visible from two locations from the original older Heathfield village site, and what you see from there with the interactive links to the place names of Sq'éwlets transformation places on the landscape. So the youth can look at this, use this site to become familiar with the world around them, that is the deeper Stalo world. Links back to the origins and provides that placement of Sq'éwlets in the land. And then again, Sq'éwlets, the series of the content in this section is about the ancestral connections and the more genealogy and practice-based history of Sq'éwlets as a community, which then gives us the ability to move into the archaeology, and it places the archaeology within that situation and adds that depth of detail and content to the places, the ancestral places of importance that these kids may or may not be aware of, but where they're taken out on the land as part of this work, documented those trips with Sonny McKelsey, the kids, members of the band office, and so on, to give them that direct experience. The timelines. So again, understanding, moving through so we cover the full time span from Sq'éwlets through Sq'éwlets, the distant past, the way the world was created through transformations and so on, all the way up through what's going on today with the timeline, an interactive timeline that gives you details and all the users and visitors details about things that happened and affected Sq'éwlets right up to now. And we have people like Gwen Point shown here in videos that are attached to this and other sections to be able to speak to these issues and speaks to these points of history, and in this case around colonial relations and displacement, where Gwen and her lineage comes from Sq'éwlets, but was displaced to Sq'éwlets, and then now into Chilliwack. She's speaking to that, and she's also speaking to other aspects of storytelling. That was a great experience with the kids. It really fun to do. So I'll stop there as we switch off narration to Mike, and as we move into the section around Auk, or belongings. So Mike, I'll turn it over to you if you want to let me know when to advance the slides, and I'll take your lead.
Okay, thanks, Dave. What you've just been talking about makes so clear and reveals something that that took me a long time to learn, but I was taught this through the coaching and teaching of the elders and community members at Sq'éwlets and other neighboring communities during the course of many years working here, and that is basically that archaeology, unlike what I had been taught as an undergraduate student, is really one small element of a huge picture, and that picture incorporates all of the land and water and air that surrounds and encloses and holds all of the ancestral and living and future generations in that area, and that perspective is something that wouldn't have been clear to me, or I wouldn't have taught that to my students early on in my career, and it's only through having been schooled or taught by people like by Kat, who's with us today, but all of the other community members and generous chiefs, for example, of Sq'éwlets, John Penyer and his mother Jean, and Vi Penyer, his wife, Betty, Charlie, and Clifford Hall, and all of the other chiefs, Alan Williams and Johnny Williams Sr. Everybody was so generous in showing us that the archaeology we were doing on this one important site, Kithiel, and all of the history and knowledge that it had to offer was really just part of a huge system. And these belongings that we were finding, the archaeological belongings that represent the tools and the food remains and the parts of houses and all of the material remains left behind that are part of this project, and as Dave pointed out at the beginning, are part of the big reciprocal research network program housed in the Museum of Anthropology at UBC, but which is really an international network. They're just a very small part of the story, and the story doesn't really make sense unless we understand the significance of every single part of this material record to the community today and the community in the future. So that's one of the key things about this particular virtual museum exhibit, is that it tries to make that clear, to really expand beyond what would be a typical approach to presenting archaeological knowledge and information, embed it in this broader context. And working your way through this exhibit, if you get a chance to explore it, as we've been able to do now over several years, thank goodness it's still up and running, it's endlessly fascinating, because every thread you pull on leads you to a whole wealth of knowledge and wealth of history that was contributed by all of the community members during the building of this website, and really the structuring of the entire project going back to its very beginning. The objects that we found at Sq'éwlets, the ancestral belongings, presented themselves in ways that were just astounding to us. Here is Brian Tom's hand. Many of you will know Brian Tom from some of his other amazing work, but Brian and I believe at the time, Sonny McKelsey and Gordon Mose were waiting along the shoreline just in front of Kithiel, and Brian leaned over and said, "Oh, look what I found." And he pulled this out of the water, and there it is in his hand. It was later sent back to the Canada Conservation Institute, where they preserved the wood and the glue that's holding the slate knife into the wood. And we were able to, with permission from the community, take a very small sample from this piece, and through radiocarbon dating establish that it's over 1,100 years old. And it's just sitting right there in the water. And our partners, community members, told us that the ancestors wanted this to be found, that we didn't find it, they revealed it to us. This and baskets and so many other perishable materials that would normally not be visible, that were eroding out of the bank, were the reason that we came to the site in the first place. In fact, I remember the first meeting with Kat, perhaps you remember this, the first meeting where after coming to visit you with David Pocatello and Gordon Mose, where we were trying to set up the next field school after the previous one at Haytim a year earlier. You said, well, you know, we've got about 10 different sites in Stalo territory that we'd like you to look at. And after spending about a week or so going to 10 different sites, Kat finally said, well, there's this other site where there's some pretty interesting things coming up in the water, some pieces of baskets, and why don't you go have a look at that one? And so that same day, we went to Kithiel for the first time, and there were these objects revealing themselves. That same trip, we walked up onto the embankment just above where the low water was, and up onto the forested embankment covered in ferns and lots of stinging nettles. And fortunately, the vegetation was just down a little bit at the time. And when we walked up on the embankment, one of the things that first caught my eye was this incredibly impressive landscape that had large mounds on the surface and small rock piles and cairns. And as we walked along and looked at the surface, it became apparent right away that these were ancestral mounds of the ancestors, not the product of other kinds of industrial activities, but these were ancestral mounds, and that immediately caught my interest, and I thought, well, with what we've been told about this site, with the danger of the erosion, with what we see on the surface, this would be the perfect place to bring our field school. And so we came in 1992 for our very first field school. And I think, Kat can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what he had in mind all along, sending us to that site last. Well, over the course of many years, many field seasons, all the way through the 1990s, we kept coming back year after year, and we were fortunate enough to team up with Dana Leposki from Simon Fraser University, and together with UBC Field Schools and SFU Field Schools, often joined and held simultaneously. We were able to work with community members at the site for several seasons and begin to explore all of the different dimensions of the ancient village, and find aspects of the technology, of the construction, of the sequence of occupation, revealing not just that there were objects eroding out of the bank, but there were the remains of well-preserved houses, longhouses and house pit constructions, or pit house constructions, or other kinds of features and dwellings, in addition to the ceremonial and sacred aspect of the cemetery that the site represented. Of course, the community members all along knew that this was a cemetery and that this was a sacred and very, very important spiritual place. And through that knowledge, and by teaching us how to be respectful in this setting, we're able to allow us to work safely in the place by teaching us proper protocols for working at the site, how to protect ourselves with tummuth, so that the ancestors could see us. And bit by bit, we were able to slowly uncover some of the history, some of the hidden history, and bring it back to the descendant community members. And that then formed the core of our involvement, but also the future museum, including a virtual museum exhibit that we see here. So now we hand off to Natasha.
I'm just going to go back for a second, Mike, on that, and just so this is the kind of connection exactly as how you translate what you're talking about, the history of the archaeological work, finding this is the Quetzal, it's a ground slate fish knife. It's that parallel to the images of Sonny Williams filleting the salmon today using a steel knife, but 1100 years ago, like you say, using archaeology and radiocarbon dating. This piece recovered, brought to an institution, brought together in collections, and then entered into the reciprocal research network just prior to, as part of the work we were doing, brings it in connection back to the community. Sorry, going the wrong way. And then into the site itself, right? So it's that demonstration of from recovery to curation to access through a virtual world, the RRN in the curatorial facility, to then brought into the community through this site as in the context of belongings, is part of achieving that goal. Showing that continuity, making those connections, and placing archaeology within, as you're saying, the broader context of those pieces we're finding being made sense of in the broader set of relations that we show here in our various pages around ancient village life, the different activities, various features that describe life at those times, including the burial mounds, which we also came up with framework and terminology to represent those as mortuary features. They're monuments to the people who were put away there. So sorry, I'll hand off to Natasha at that point.
Hey, thanks.
I think you're handing it off to Kat, actually. So, Kat, here is Kat. Here's a Kat saying right here, to know where you're going, you have to know where you've come from. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I have to drive kids to soccer in about 5, but this is really Kat's section, so I'll just be his cheerleader until I leave. Kat, you need to unmute yourself.
I also will have to go pick up a kid soon, so I'm very sorry. I'll stay as long as I can.
But Kat, tell us all about Sq'éwlets.
About what?
About Sq'éwlets.
Oh, Sq'éwlets, people of the land, that's what it means. And it's how we refer to ourselves as, because we come from the land, and everything belongs to the land, and it's all connected in terms of what purposes everything has. And Earlier you saw Stalo referring to us as people of the river, so we depend on the river for a lot of our resources and transportation in the old days. And like I said, people, Hualmoch is just people of the land, and how we have to take care of it for our future generations, all the things that are included on it.
And Dave, what have we got next? Right. So
Yeah.
this is about, well, we talked a lot, hey Kat, about how to represent different parts of Sq'éwlets culture and what to talk about. And Kate gave us ideas for how we would bring different elements together, such as this page, which is, well,
All right. I'll catch up with you. This page, yes.
which is all about the short videos that Kate and her students put together. So this represented, you know, hours and hours and hours of video footage, and then different themes emerged from these discussions. So these are just some of Kat's community members here talking about these issues and ideas that are really critical to what it means to be Sq'éwlets.
And also we've talked to some of those protocols that really were established in archaeology in this region by the work at Sq'éwlets, and the image of Sonny McKelsey with the red paint, that tumith, becoming a standard practice and part of our protocol and policy for doing archaeological work when interacting with places that are ancestral villages, burial grounds, and so on. That's talked about and explained, which is really, really helpful for the rest of us educationally studying archaeology, but also for the community. It's the perpetuation of those practices that are, again, represented here in the site. There we go.
This is the Golden Eagles Canoe Club. And so we spent a lot of time talking to kids about what they do and you know, what interests them, what it means to be Sq'éwlets, what the culture means to them. And kids today are growing up more and more with language and with the traditions than they did when I first was at Sq'éwlets, because these things are resurfacing and being restored from the really hard work of community members. Kat?
Because it's not only just about learning how to use a paddle, there's a lot of things involved in what you learn out there, how to be a member of a team, how to support each other, and who's in charge out there, and not just anybody can do what they want out there. Learn about the different aspects of water and how dangerous it can be in different places. Here it's all calm and everything, but when you go to pull in a salt truck, it can become a little dangerous, you know. So you have to learn a lot of different things about being on the canoe and who you are as a person.
This image goes back to those kids too. The bottom right corner is Gwen Point telling the children the story of Sq'éwlets, the cannibal woman, and really takes place in a setting much like we see here with the kids canoeing on the shoreline at Harrison Bay. And that story is all about life learning skills to avoid being taken. And it's these kind of connections, teachings brought to the youth's involvement and being on the land, learning through canoeing and other ways, again, are key content that we brought into the site. And these two folks, Sonny and Crystal, were just fundamentally important in orchestrating a lot of that connection with the youth. And afterlife, Mike, Natasha, Kat, I mean, Mike, you talked about the work that went on dealing with the mortuary features, the mounds, and the permission by Sq'éwlets to carry out excavations at the request for a particular reason, and also the guidance as to how to do that respectfully and properly. Through that whole process of excavation, recovering of belongings, what to do with those that were recovered, and again, following that whole process of being curated and then brought back into connection with the community through these means, are significant parts of what we talk about here. Any thoughts, anything you'd like to speak to on that part of the work and that part of what's being represented?
Well, I think I'd just like to say that I think that it's really a break with what had gone on in among archaeologists and archaeological practice in the past, and it was through the urging of community members and experts like Kat, but also others from within Sq'éwlets region, like, for example, Frank Malloway, who came and gave us guidance right on site about how to protect ourselves when we were doing this work, how important it was to do the work, but to be very, very careful and respectful, knowledgeable about the dangers that are the spiritual dangers that are presented when interacting with the ancestors. If you don't go in with a clear mind, with a good heart, and it was just that teaching that helped us, helped our students, helped other community members who were participating in the project to do this very, very difficult work, and emotionally draining work, but in a way that helped get us through it, but also reveal knowledge about the ancestors in the past that we would not otherwise have known. So, for example, we were able to, down the road, determine that, for example, these beautiful abalone earrings would have come all the way from the West Coast and would have been made by specialists there and traded into Sq'éwlets, so that the people at Sq'éwlets were important people who had access to these really high prestige items, and they were part of the burial assemblage, honoring the ancestor in that spot. So taking them out of the ground was a very, very difficult thing to do. But the elders agreed that it would be better to have them in a safe place for future generations to be able to understand their importance. And so with Frank Malloway's guidance, and he talked to other elders around, elders throughout the Sq'éwlets region, including Sq'éwlets, about what we would do to honor the ancestor during reburial. And so similar items were placed back in the grave with the ancestor when the ancestor was reburied. And these belongings are now in the Museum of Anthropology at UBC, and can be repatriated at any time back to Sq'éwlets if at some point in the future they decide that that would be a better thing to do. So it opens up these kinds of possibilities that never would have been a part of archaeological practice in previous generations. So my hat goes off to the elders and leaders that really taught us so much about how to rethink the way we do the kind of work that we do.
And I know this slide in particular, this page has a whole bunch of those traditional knowledge labels. Kate, how much time do you have with us before you have to take off?
Well, I can make it down to the school in 15 minutes, so I've got like 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Yeah, you want to speak to those? I'll get to a point where we can always come back to cover this a bit more, but hand off to Kate and talk about traditional knowledge labels.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we were really lucky with this project to be able to first of all, have the images and the videos and the little documentaries that we created emerge out of this, deep, many decade relationship that Kat and Mike and others had established. And I was very fortunate to come in kind of as a producer, to help think about how to translate this into this virtual exhibit. So we had a lot of incredible images and recordings and archival images, and we were trying to find ways to represent belongings like the afterlife belongings that Dave and Mike have just talked about. So we connected with anthropologists Kim Christian and Jane Anderson, who have been working on a project many of you are probably familiar with called Local Contexts. They'd been developing traditional knowledge labels and eventually licenses that would allow communities to write, contextual, local interpretations of their cultural property rights and their ways of thinking about ethical ways that knowledge should circulate. Trying to get at kind of difficult questions around digital material and digital forms of knowledge that might be circulating outside of the local context. So what do you do to show and educate people on how that knowledge should be shared or not shared? So, we had workshops where we sat down with community members. We looked at images like you saw us in that earlier photograph, doing a sort of image workshop, and looked at the labels that they had developed with other communities in the past, translated them into Sq'éwlets, and then wrote the definitions of each of these labels from the community perspective. So this is attribution, and it's essentially referring to who produced the knowledge. In our Sq'éwlets language, we call this Sq'éwlets. I can't say it properly, I'm sorry, Kat, but scout. Yeah. So it's basically giving the definition of this label. What's the next label that you've got there, Steve?
Next one is Sq'éwlets.
Okay, so again, outreach is another example. So this very clearly stating this intention that what's being presented on the site is to educate Stolo and non-Stolo people. And then I'm wondering if you have the haha one coming up, Dave.
I think that's what we were going to get into the site itself and just bring that up.
Sure. You might have seen when we were looking at the afterlife belongings page, there was on the top of the page a whole bunch of those little icons, and each one of those represents one of the traditional knowledge labels. Some of them are present on every single page in the website, acknowledging that attribution is required, that this is about outreach, and it's been verified by the community as appropriate. But some of the pages and some of the videos and some of the belongings have a little box, a little kind of dark box, and the label is haha, that means secret or sacred. So this is applied to different parts of the site where the intention is to educate people that there are sacred and secret forms of knowledge and belongings that have been selected to be shown in particular ways, but for which the knowledge will not be shared. So this was an important outcome of the process that the community engaged in with all of our partners to think about what could be presented ethically. Should I be sharing that, Dave, or?
Can you see? I'm hoping you can see.
No, I can't. I can just see the PowerPoint. Maybe just share a different window or something like that.
I'm not so good at this. Do you want to?
I know. Yeah. Well,
I'll stop sharing if you want to take it over.
Yes, I can do it for like 3 minutes. But I'm happy to do it. Here, I'll share.
Or a new share? How's that? I don't know.
Here we go. I'm going to share. Hope that's. Are you seeing the website?
Seeing part. Yep. There we go.
Okay. Great. So it's hard to watch someone else navigate a website online. So I hope that you've all had a chance to take a look at the site. And it's going a bit slow, maybe because I'm Zooming with so many people. But I'll just, let's see. You can see here, these are the traditional knowledge labels. And I'm going to go to a page that talks about more traditional knowledge labels. So there's a few images of us in our workshop. And here we kind of explain what the different traditional knowledge labels were that we used. And in particular, you know, the secret sacred one, you can see that we've linked back to the particular places in the site where we're indicating that certain types of knowledge are restricted, that it's considered sacred, secret, potent, or private, and only certain people or families should have access to it. So it was decided that, you know, these were really important parts of the story, but there would be ways to represent them that respected their secret or sacred nature. So that's an example of, I think, a really neat outcome that we took on as a group in order to translate this knowledge and these histories and this way of being in the world, the ontology that Dave and Kat have talked about, into a digital format that's meant for public viewing and for education. Dave, how's that?
Yeah, that's good. I think we've got
that you would like me to navigate to before I
that. I have us at about 4:13, 4:15. Probably a good time just to turn it over if there's folks who have questions and use the last 15 minutes or so.
Okay,